You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's begin with the top headlines making news around the world. Iran vows to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed until Washington meets its demands, rejecting President Donald Trump's claim of U.S. total control. Major Russian grain export terminals hit in Ukraine Black Sea port attack. And Colombia's earthquake death toll has risen to 265 as rescuers intensify efforts to find hundreds still officially missing. The prospects of reviving a temporary peace agreement between Iran and the United States appear increasingly uncertain. Tehran says there has been no progress on key commitments, while Washington continues to pressure Iran over the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran and the United States have made no progress towards reviving an interim peace agreement or setting a timetable for its implementation, according to a senior Iranian source. The comments came on Wednesday after US President Donald Trump again criticized Iran's leadership and claimed Washington had total control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Strait Authority, however, said the waterway would remain blocked until Tehran's conditions were accepted. The June agreement called for an immediate end to military operations and gave the two sides 60 days to reach a permanent deal on Iran's nuclear program and US sanctions. But the arrangement quickly broke down. Trump declared it over in July, while Tehran later said it was suspended. Washington accuses Iran of failing to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says the United States has failed to lift its blockade of Iranian ports and release frozen assets. Tehran also rejected a report that the 60-day period could be extended, saying there was no agreement to extend. Meanwhile, attacks on shipping in the region have continued. 4 crew members were killed in a suspected Houthi attack on a cargo vessel in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait on Tuesday, while a US Navy helicopter disabled the steering gear of another ship.
Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has urged Tehran to support de-escalation and ensure the free and safe passage of ships without additional charges in the Strait of Hormuz. She spoke with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian on the phone as diplomatic efforts continue to reopen the important waterway. Takaichi also urged Iran to press the Houthis to halt attacks near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Pezeshkian outlined Tehran's talks with Oman and Saudi Arabia, and both leaders agreed to maintain contact. Japan imports around 90% of its crude oil from the Middle East, making it particularly vulnerable to disruption along the key shipping route. Higher oil prices have increased its import bill and contributed to broader pressure on the yen. A major Ukrainian attack on Russia's Black Sea port of Novorossiysk has halted operations at 3 grain terminals, raising wheat prices. The disruption comes as Russian attacks severely restrict Ukraine's own agricultural exports, raising wider concerns about global food supplies.
3 major grain terminals at Russia's Black Sea port of Novorossiysk halted operations after Ukrainian strikes on Wednesday, disrupting exports from one of the world's largest wheat suppliers. Wheat futures rose by around 3%. Russia, the world's largest wheat exporter, said it was considering alternative routes through Baltic and Caspian ports, the Far East and overland. Moscow's foreign ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova accused Kyiv of seeking to create chaos in the global food market for the benefit of some Western countries. She said the attacks would drive up food prices and increase pressure on countries in the global south and east. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack targeted Russia's naval base and the infrastructure supporting its Black Sea fleet. He said air defense positions, piers and port facilities were hit. Meanwhile, Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports and vessels cut Kyiv's grain shipments by 76% in the first 2 weeks of August, compared with a year earlier.
The scariest thing right now is that we have nowhere to put this grain. And today, with the blockade Russia is imposing on Odessa and its ports, through which we used to export about 4.5 million tons, this is truly a disaster for all farmers.
Russia and Ukraine account for more than a quarter of global wheat exports, leaving countries dependent on Black Sea grain increasingly exposed to shortages and higher prices.
Chechnya's leader Ramzan Kadyrov has strongly backed Russia's war in Ukraine while limiting the conflict's impact on his own republic. The Economist reports that Moscow's support has helped Kadyrov maintain significant control over recruitment and military units.
In Chechnya, support for Russia's war in Ukraine has come with an important exception: that the head of the Chechen Republic, Ramzan Kadyrov, has largely avoided sending large numbers of his own people to the front. The Economist says there is little appetite among many Chechens for fighting on Moscow's behalf. People over the age of 35 still remember the two wars Russia fought in Chechnya between 1994 and 2009, including widespread destruction and abuse by Russian forces. Kadyrov, who once fought against Russia before switching sides, has ruled the republic since 2007. He has since built a close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin and secured substantial financial support from Moscow. The arrangement has allowed him to protect his own position while keeping compulsory recruitment largely out of Chechnya. Instead, fighters from other parts of Russia have been brought into Chechen units. Kadyrov has claimed that more than 70,000 Chechen fighters have been sent to Ukraine, around 9% of the republic's male population. Yet independent Russian outlet Media Zona recorded 539 Chechen military deaths by the 10th of July, which is about 0.2% of Russia's total recorded losses. The difference is also reflected in the Akhmat Special Forces. Its commander says only about a quarter of the unit's fighters are Chechen, with the rest recruited from outside the republic, often for money. The Economist says Kadyrov has therefore been able to demonstrate unwavering loyalty to Putin while presenting himself to Chechens as a leader who protects his people. At the same time, the war has given him another tool for controlling those he considers disloyal, with some people reportedly pressured into military service.
Europe's confrontation with Russia is increasingly moving beyond the battlefield and into international waters. This comes as a growing dispute over shipping is raising fresh questions about how far both sides are prepared to go. A-News' Anita Sharma has the details.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Russia is warning of a new front in its confrontation with Europe, this time at sea. President Vladimir Putin says Moscow will respond in kind if European countries begin seizing vessels linked to Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Speaking during naval exercises in the Russian Far East, Putin accused some European nations of violating international maritime law, calling the proposed seizures piracy and robbery. He warned Russia could retaliate wherever it saw fit, not just in the waters where its own ships are stopped. Now, the warning comes as the EU steps up pressure on Russia's shadow fleet, a network of aging tankers accused of evading sanctions by transporting Russian oil through opaque ownership and foreign registrations that conceal who controls the vessels. Several European governments are considering detaining or seizing suspected sanctions violators. Russia's Pacific Fleet commander says Russian naval forces are prepared to inspect and detain vessels from what Moscow calls hostile states, raising the prospect of tit-for-tat action at sea. While Putin's comments mark a sharp escalation in rhetoric, they also underscore how strategically important the shadow fleet is for Russia. With much of its oil exports moving by sea, Moscow has a strong incentive to protect the shadow fleet. Many of the aging tankers operate outside the traditional Western insurance system, increasing the financial and environmental risks of an accident. Those concerns intensified this week after a sanctioned tanker carrying Russian oil ran aground off Oman, causing one of the region's largest oil spills in years. The dispute shows how the battle over sanctions is increasingly shifting from banks and financial markets to the world's shipping lanes. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
To discuss President Vladimir Putin's warning, the risk of maritime escalation, the effectiveness of the EU's sanctions strategy, and what this could mean for the wider war, we're joined by Rudolf Mikhowicz, Chief Executive Officer of the Christian Medical Association, speaking to us from Lviv, Ukraine. Mr. Mikhowicz, thank you very much for making time to join us on the program.
Hello, thank you so much.
Hello. Mr. Mikhowicz, Putin has threatened to seize European ships in retaliation for the seizure and possible sale of cargo from Russian-linked vessels. How seriously should we take this threat, and how likely is Russia to actually carry it out?
First of all, I would like to say thank you to Azerbaijan people, because in recent strikes you help us with the generators and other, and we feel it on the ground here, your help. So thank you so much. This is very important to hospitals and to people that are in need. Second of all, Putin does what he usually does. He's just threatening as soon as he feels a real threat. This happens with tanks, with rockets, and this happening with hidden airships. And we need to understand, this is not trade machine. This is not a business world. This is a hidden aircraft of oil tanks that are supplying war machine.
So Putin said Russia could respond anywhere it considers necessary. Does this suggest that Moscow is deliberately leaving the geographical scope of a possible retaliation ambiguous?
I think he's trying to make afraid of anybody from Japan, South Korea to Americans, and to, of course, to Europe. Sweden that took this last oil tank with, sorry, not oil, but stolen grains, and will give it to Ukraine. And Ukraine will use it to build new hospitals or help to economy recover after missiles. And this logic has to be very clear. So the victim receive the recovery and restoration. Victim of the war, I mean. So I think Putin is trying to tell to the world, like, be careful, watch out, I'm going to do bad things. But he already did everything that he could. And if he's going to occupy or stole some of the European or other countries, I think he's in much better, weaker position than European countries.
So what exactly makes the seizure and potential sale of cargo from these vessels so sensitive from the perspective of international maritime law?
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a doctor. So it's hard for me to comment on those things. But what I can tell from Ukrainian civilians, that international law was blotted and cancelled many times by Russia. So international law, international community needs to react properly on Russian deeds.
Mr. Mikhowicz, the Baltic Sea and Black Sea are already highly militarized and politically sensitive. How serious is the risk that an incident involving a commercial vessel could trigger a much broader confrontation between Russia and European states?
Very good question. So from our perspective here from Ukraine, Putin is only trying to involve and find a reason for Europe to be involved in the war. And it's not just some like European will supply or will put in prison some of the Russian actives. No, he's trying to sell to his people a reason to attack Europe. We see from intelligent Ukrainian and European that he has a plan for next year and year after that to have a war with Europe. Because when you have a poor population and big war machine, you will not stop. So I think that he's looking for reasons.
So the EU is targeting not only vessels, but also Russian banks, financial institutions, crypto platforms, and other parts of the sanctions evasion network. Can sanctions still significantly weaken Russia's war economy after more than 4 years of restrictions?
I like to compare things. North Korea and Iran is a country that live under the sanctions many years, and they can live a long time. So will it stop Putin and war machine? No. But should we listen some of the good Russians that are telling like, let's stop sanctions? No, because less sanctions, more money to war machine, easier to build rockets, easier to build Shahid. So we feel all the time when Russia has more money and less sanctions, it's easier for them to build new rockets and to kill more people.
Mr. Mikhovic, Ukraine's military has said that dozens of North Korean missiles have been fired by Russia into its territory since Moscow's full-scale invasion in February 2022. The Ukrainian president warned over the weekend that as many as 50,000 North Korean soldiers were being sent to fight with Russian forces. How could deeper military cooperation between Russia and North Korea affect regional security and the wider international response?
I believe that even if 50,000 soldiers not on the front, it's still a big support. By our calculation of our commanders, on the Ukrainian side, we need from 15 to 20,000 soldiers on the first line. We're talking about because right now we have much more drone and operators and other. So 50,000 not on the first line, it's a big number. Those people will prepare trenches, those people will work in the factories and help the war machine. So it's a big support and it's a big threat for us. We saw it in Kursk region and etc. So I believe especially South Korea needs to react very aggressively and to finally start support Ukraine, at least with anti-ballistic missiles that we are deeply needing right now. So yes, North Korean soldiers probably will not be having a clear fights with Ukrainians, but they will support and they will learn and they will become stronger.
So Ukraine has also intensified long-range strikes against the Russian infrastructure and energy facilities. How much pressure are these attacks actually putting on Russia's economy and domestic stability?
So we don't have expectation here in Ukraine that it will totally destroy economy. Why? Because Russia has been destroying our economy since the first day. And those messages that if we are targeting their wild berries warehouses, so they're going to start targeting our business warehouses, it's absolutely lie, because they targeted our civilian business for a long, long time. And we have maybe the hardest year this time for the business. Unprecedented situation. A lot of businesses relocating to Western Ukraine or outside the country. So this is a very hard year. But we definitely need to continue because less taxes, less money in Russia's economy, more people will stand up, more problems, less rockets. Even one rocket can create a lot of a problem, and one rocket less, it helps us to close the war and finish it.
Rudolf Mikhovic, Chief Executive Officer of the Christian Medical Association, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your analysis and insights on these important developments. We greatly appreciate your time and expertise. And after the break, we'll look at the remaining stories from around the world. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Record-breaking heat is putting growing pressure on communities and public services across Britain. The prolonged high temperatures are also raising fresh concerns about the wider impact on the economy. A News correspondent has more on the story from Manchester.
The UK's repeated heat waves could have cost the economy around £4.4 billion in lost output so far this year, according to analysis by the green think tank Verdant. It says the figure has almost doubled from its previous estimate of £2.36 billion, as high temperatures continued into July. Workers become less productive in extreme heat, while infrastructure and equipment can also overheat. The Met Office has issued an amber warning for extreme heat in parts of England, with temperatures remaining unusually high this week. Verdant warns the annual economic cost could exceed £25 billion by 2030 if heat waves continue to intensify at the current rate. It is calling for maximum welcome temperatures, as well as more investment in green spaces to help cool towns and cities. The government is also dealing with the wider impacts of the heat wave, including wildfire risks and pressure on public services. Prime Minister de Burnham chaired an emergency Cobra meeting on Wednesday to discuss the extreme heat and its wider impacts. The government is considering measures, including a possible ban on disposable barbecues amid concerns about wildfire risks, and with almost 3/4 of England officially in drought. The pressure is growing on the government to respond to both the immediate impacts of extreme heat and the longer-term economic risks. Zainab Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries has cut its forecast for global oil demand growth this year, pointing to weaker demand in Asia. OPEC now expects demand to grow by around 600,000 barrels a day in 2026, down from its earlier forecast of 800,000. China, India and other Asian markets are expected to see slower growth. However, OPEC is more upbeat about next year, raising its demand growth forecast to around 2.2 million barrels a day from 1.9 million. Asia and Europe are expected to lead that growth. Oil prices fell by more than $1 on Thursday as weaker demand added to pressure from disruptions caused by the conflict in the Gulf. Brent crude fell by 1.5% to around $88 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude dropped 1.6%. The International Energy Agency now expects global oil demand to fall by 1.6 million barrels a day this year, as tighter fuel supplies and higher prices cut demand. New information has come to light about U.S. President Donald Trump's secret plane swap when he left a NATO summit in Turkey last month over concerns of a possible security threat. Here's what we know and the unusual security operation that followed.
A threat that Air Force One could be targeted by a shoulder-fired missile was what prompted the Secret Service to secretly move U.S. President Donald Trump onto a smaller government jet last month. The Secret Service deemed the threat to be credible and imminent. That's according to a person briefed on the matter. The source declined to say where the intelligence came from, but said officials had little time to prepare and devised the plans at the last minute. The threat emerged on the final day of his trip in Turkey for the NATO summit. The New York Times reported that US officials were alarmed to discover that Iranians knew where Trump was staying in Ankara, including the exact floor of his hotel. The White House has not commented on the latest reports. However, Trump confirmed on Wednesday that he secretly switched planes, saying he had acted on Secret Service advice because of a potential security threat. That admission followed reports that Trump boarded Air Force One on the 8th of July in full view of TV cameras, before being moved to a military plane in a catering truck. Air Force One then flew across Europe with members of the White House press corps and senior aides on board. They were reportedly unaware that Trump was no longer on the plane. Passengers were directed to keep the window blinds drawn during that flight from Ankara to Britain. The security operation has drawn criticism, with questions raised over whether those remaining on the aircraft should have been protected or informed about the nature of the threat. Trump later said he was following Secret Service directives and rejected claims that passengers had been put at greater risk. He said the aircraft he moved to could have been the primary target.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, one of President Donald Trump's most trusted advisors, will step down at the end of August, ahead of November's midterm elections. Leavitt said she wants to spend more time with her young children after recently returning from maternity leave. The 28-year-old was the youngest person appointed to the role and served for around 18 months. She will remain involved as an outside communications advisor and party operative, helping shape the future of Trump's Make America Great Again movement.
No, they're not. I think they're not co-op.
Colombia is turning from emergency rescue towards looking at long-term recovery after Monday's devastating earthquake. President Abelardo de la Espriella has announced financial assistance for affected families and businesses, alongside plans to rebuild essential infrastructure.
Colombian President Abelardo de la Espriella has declared an economic emergency following Monday's magnitude 7.4 earthquake, which killed 265 people and left nearly 500 missing. The declaration allows the president to introduce measures by decree that would normally require congressional approval.
I have decided to invoke the economic emergency, a mechanism provided for in our Constitution, in order to address this crisis appropriately. The emergency I am proposing will create a miracle fund, an entity that will channel national and international contributions towards the reconstruction of hospitals, schools, buildings, roads, and airports that were damaged by the earthquake.
The government is also preparing utility payments and rental subsidies for affected families, alongside tax relief, financial assistance, and support for small businesses. Rescue operations in Cali remain focused on 7 collapsed buildings, where survivors may still be trapped. Access has been restricted at some sites to help specialist sensors detect movement beneath the rubble and reduce the danger from possible aftershocks. More than 9,500 homes have been destroyed, while landslides have disrupted roads and temporarily halted operations at Buenaventura's ports. International assistance has begun arriving from Peru, Mexico, and El Salvador.
And after the break, we'll look at more stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Iran is calling for compensation over environmental damage caused by pollution in the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghei said on X that images circulating on social media show oil pollution along the coast of Geshem Island near the Strait of Hormuz. He said the pollution had drifted toward the coast from the Persian Gulf, with initial assessments indicating that a foreign bulk carrier may be the source. Baghei said the region's waters and marine ecosystem have been seriously damaged by both visible and hidden sources of pollution, causing what he described as trillions of dollars in damage to Iran's coastal areas. Turkey will continue to play a constructive mediating role in bridging divisions between Libya's eastern and western factions. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said negotiations aimed at reunifying the country would help pave the way for a single, sovereign and independent Libya.
Hem doğuyla hem batıyla eşit düzeyde ilişkileri yürütmesi.
Turkey's ability to maintain relations with both the East and the West on an equal footing, and to be a country that genuinely and realistically wants Libya's unity and territorial integrity, is greatly appreciated here. The leaders here, both in the East and the West, truly recognize the potential strength and prosperity that could emerge from a united Libya. This is very important. Such a step would not only help solve Libya's problems, but would also make a major contribution to Africa as a whole, the Islamic world and the wider region.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has held talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara, with Gaza, Palestinian statehood and regional security high on the agenda. The meeting came as Turkey promotes a newly signed defense pact with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which Erdogan says could eventually expand to include other countries in the region. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas was received by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara on Wednesday, with the two leaders discussing the situation in Gaza, Palestinian statehood aspirations, and regional security. Speaking after their talks, Erdogan reiterated Turkey's support for the Palestinian cause and said Ankara would continue raising the issue on international platforms. He also criticized Israel's military actions in Gaza and condemned Israeli actions around Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, warning against moves that could alter the existing status quo at the site, which remains a major flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Regional security was also high on the agenda. Abbas welcomed a trilateral defense pact signed last week by Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, saying it could contribute to regional stability and protect the interests of Muslim countries. Erdogan has said the agreement could eventually be expanded to include other countries in the region, describing broader participation as a potential step towards greater stability. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Central Asian countries are reshaping their fuel supply route as disruptions to traditional imports from Russia put pressure on markets. Kyrgyzstan, which has long relied heavily on Russian fuel, is now turning to new suppliers. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzna reports on whether these changes could lead to a long-term shift.
Kyrgyzstan has started receiving fuel from Belarus, Azerbaijan, Turkey and another European country as it seeks to diversify its supplies, while negotiations with Kazakhstan and China are continuing. According to Kyrgyzstan's Association of Oil Traders, supplies from Russian refineries are now virtually unavailable. Russia had previously accounted for around 90% of Kyrgyzstan's fuel imports. The association expects the situation could begin to stabilize by October, when Russian exporters are expected to increase refining capacity and resume supplies to the Eurasian Economic Union. Rising global fuel prices, however, could put additional pressure on domestic prices. Kyrgyzstan is also working to reduce its reliance on imports by accelerating construction of a domestic refinery with an annual capacity of 450,000 tons. The facility could start operating by the end of 2026 and cover about a quarter of the country's annual fuel demand. Other Central Asian countries are also adjusting their supply routes. Tajikistan tripled fuel imports from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in July, while Russian petrol supplies fell by half. Uzbekistan has significant domestic fuel production, while Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan remain largely self-sufficient and continue supplying neighboring markets. And against this backdrop, regional media are also discussing Tajik President Emomali Rahmon's proposal to build another major refinery aimed primarily at meeting Central Asia's fuel demand. Fariza Kalimurzna, Almaty, A News.
To discuss Kyrgyzstan's fuel situation, the impact of disruptions in Russian refining and the prospects for new supply routes, we're joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar, a journalist at the Korea Herald, speaking to us from Seoul, South Korea. Mr. Kumar, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Mr. Kumar, how serious is Kyrgyzstan's current fuel supply situation, and should consumers be concerned about prolonged shortages?
Yes, because it is going to impact consumers in short and long term both, because it is socio-economic impact. We know that Kyrgyzstan had been very much dependent on the Russian supply, and now it is becoming a high time to diversify and de-risk the energy security and supplies. Why it is very critical, and you know that not many countries in the region can directly support just in a day, just in a week, like the Russians were supplying. So new supply chain has to be developed, and that is why the role of the regional players such as Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan becomes very important, which may act as an opportunity also. That is a separate, that can be a separate move and opportunity that we can discuss separately.
So Kyrgyzstan is now receiving fuel from Belarus, Azerbaijan and Turkey, and you have also mentioned that. How important can these alternative suppliers become?
See, supply is one thing, but in the global supply chain, alternatives are very important, because in last few months, what we have seen is the supply chain uncertainty as well as the energy insecurity. And that energy insecurity is going to be in the center for many months. We know that this Russia-Ukraine war is not going to end very soon. At least for this year, we are not sure it is going to end. And the attacks of drone by Ukraine on energy infrastructure in Russia has raised eyebrows of many in US, the Asian countries and the region. And that is why, countries like Belarus, Azerbaijan, Turkey is significant. And Azerbaijan can play an important role because of the long-term middle corridor and the supply chain de-risking and diversifying. So that is why Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan may play an important role, and it is high time for Kyrgyzstan to diversify and de-risk. I am not saying that they must suddenly change their supplies from Russia, but the reality is that they are suffering, and this suffering must not go to the consumers, and that is very critical right now. Kyrgyzstan has to talk to players and countries like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, including Belarus and Turkey.
Mr. Kumar, what logistical challenges could Kyrgyzstan face when importing fuel from Azerbaijan and Turkey, particularly in terms of transport routes, costs and transit infrastructure?
See, it will make the case very vulnerable when it comes to prices. The changed supply chain would be having addition of logistics, and finally it is going to be paid by the consumer's pocket. And that is why it is really important right now to talk with these countries to make an alternative infrastructure, because so far that kind of corridors are in place, but that corridors have not been in regulation. This supply chain crisis right now, this supply crisis due to Russian gas is sending very strong signal to many countries in the region, and Kyrgyzstan can be a game changer. But Rome was not built in a day, and that is why the new infrastructure is not built in a day. But we have to start from somewhere, and this is a very high time, this is very critical time to start these discussions and try to initiate this new supply chain corridor.
Mm-hmm. So how much more expensive could alternative fuel supplies be compared with Russian deliveries? And could this lead to higher prices for consumers in Kyrgyzstan?
See, there would be some energy mix, because not alone this new destinations or new corridors are going to solve the issue. There will have to be an energy mix with Russian supplies as well as the new suppliers, and that if we do not, if Kyrgyzstan does not go with the new strategy, the prices can be doubled. We don't know, because there is a geopolitical uncertainty. Yeah. And we don't know when the war is going to end, and how the prices are going to be, because the European markets are also suffering because of this, and that makes the situation worse. And because of this, we cannot exactly calculate right now, but it can be doubled, and there would be socio-economic impact, which will having spillover effect not just to Kyrgyzstan but also the neighboring countries who are dependent on Russian supplies, and that is why Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan has to particularly have to play a role here.
Mr. Kumar, do you see the current fuel crisis as a temporary response to refinery disruptions in Russia, or could it fundamentally change Kyrgyzstan's energy trade patterns?
The Ukrainian drone attacks, if they are going to continue, and if the war is prolonged for more than 6 months, then definitely it is going to be a long-term issue. But if the talks which were not working, the dialogue and diplomacy have failed, if in sometime soon, I mean in next 4 or 5 months, if both the sides come to table and if it gets a little stabilized, then we can see a solution. But it will have a long-term impact. Already it is facing long-term impact. So we are not in situation. It is not easy for journalists like you and me to exactly tell the time when it is going to end. But yes, it is going to have a severe long-term impact. For that, I'm sure.
Dr. Sanjay Kumar, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insights on this important issue. We greatly appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Pakistan says it's ready to assist a Saudi-led maritime coalition after 3 of its sailors were killed in a Houthi attack in the Red Sea. Mariam Zia has more from Islamabad.
3 Pakistani sailors have been killed in the Red Sea, prompting Islamabad to say it is ready to assist a Saudi-led maritime coalition focused on protecting commercial shipping in the region. The sailors were killed on Tuesday when the vessel Tehama came under attack while sailing through the Bab al-Mandab Strait of Yemen. Another Pakistani national was injured. The incident came less than 2 weeks after Saudi Arabia established the Multinational Maritime Defense Alliance on the 30th of July. 14 countries, including Pakistan, backed its founding communique. The coalition covers the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandab Strait, and the Gulf of Aden, with a focus on maritime security and freedom of navigation. At a Foreign Office briefing on Wednesday, spokesman Tahir Andrabi said Pakistan was ready to assist Saudi Arabia and other coalition members in implementing the communique. Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar said Islamabad was also in contact with Saudi and Yemeni authorities over the attack and arrangements for the victims. Pakistan has not yet specified what form its support for the coalition will take. However, the attack has given Islamabad's commitment to the Saudi-led initiative a direct national dimension. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Turkmenistan is seeking to strengthen its role in transport routes connecting Central Asia with European markets. Officials have highlighted cooperation with Georgia, including the development of the Trans-Caspian and Lapis Lazuli corridors.
Turkmenistan is stepping up cooperation with Georgia to expand transport links between Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Europe. Speaking at the conference on Caspian Sea cooperation, Turkmen Foreign Minister Rashid Muradov highlighted the development of the Middle Corridor and the Trans-Caspian Road as key areas of bilateral cooperation. The move follows a series of recent initiatives. In February, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Georgia agreed to strengthen coordination along the Middle Corridor, including cargo transportation and digitalization. In July, during President Sardar Mohammadov's visit to Georgia, Ashgabat also said it was negotiating the establishment of a Turkmen cargo terminal on Georgia's Black Sea coast. The road would allow goods traveling from Central Asia across Caspian Sea to reach Georgian ports and continue towards Turkey and European markets. Turkmenistan and Georgia are also working on the Lapis Lazuli corridor, linking Afghanistan with Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. The push comes as the Trans-Caspian Road gains importance as countries seek to diversify trade routes and reduce reliance on traditional northern corridors. The European Union says freight volumes along the road have quadrupled since 2022 and is supporting investment in ports, railway, roads and logistics infrastructure. For Turkmenistan, stronger links with Georgia could therefore provide greater access to Black Sea ports and European markets, while strengthening its position as a transit hub between Central Asia and the West. Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
For a few extraordinary moments, daylight gave way to darkness as millions looked to the skies across Europe. A rare celestial spectacle brought crowds together from city streets to remote observatories, as people waited to witness a sight not seen across the region for nearly 3 decades.
Millions of people across Europe have gathered to watch the region's first total solar eclipse in 27 years, with the moon briefly blocking out the sun and turning daylight into darkness. The path of totality crossed parts of Iceland and northern Spain, drawing huge crowds. In Spain, officials expected up to 6 million visitors, particularly in rural areas along the eclipse path and the Balearic Islands. At the Javalambre Observatory in Arcos de las Salinas, the sky fell dark at totality, prompting cheers from locals and visitors. Among those watching was Queen guitarist Brian May. In Aria, crowds also celebrated as the town was plunged into darkness, while telescopes at the Yebes Observatory in Guadalajara captured the eclipse using specialized filters. The spectacle was also visible elsewhere across the continent. In Reykjavik, Iceland, crowds gathered as the moon's shadow reached the country's western coast before moving eastwards. Across the UK, more than 90% of the sun was covered, with skies darkening over London's Tower Bridge as people gathered to watch the partial eclipse. In Poland, crowds in Warsaw and along the Baltic coast watched as more than 80% of the sun was obscured shortly before sunset. On beaches in Phrygian, Italy, people looked skywards wearing protective eclipse glasses and taking photographs, while in Brussels, spectators described the event as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For many across Europe, it was a rare chance to see one of nature's most striking astronomical displays.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned for more updates.